I stood in the doorway of what used to be my bedroom, heart pounding in my chest. Not because I had just taken a 7-hour bus ride home for spring break. Not because I was carrying a suitcase full of gifts I'd picked up from campus shops. But because the wooden nameplate I'd painted in 8th grade was gone. The doorknob had been replaced. I pushed the door open, and for a second I couldn't breathe. My room, my sanctuary, my space, my 17 years of memories was unrecognizable. The pastel walls I'd begged to paint had been covered. The wooden bed frame where I hid journals in the drawers was replaced with a larger floral-covered one. The bookshelf that once held my favorite novels now displayed dolls, sketchbooks, and bubblegum pink stationery. On the desk sat a new photo in a silver frame. A little girl, grinning between my parents. Her name was Grace. I turned and headed downstairs, my chest tight. Mom was in the kitchen, pouring orange juice into a glass. She looked up, smiled casually, like everything was normal. "Lena, you're home! How was the trip?" I didn't answer right away. My voice was buried under disbelief. "Where's my room?" I asked. She blinked, confused by the question. "What do you mean?" "My room, the one I grew up in. It's gone." She sighed, the kind of sigh that says, "Don't make a scene." "Well, we didn't think you'd be coming home much anymore. You've got your dorm now, and Grace really needed her own space. We just rearranged a little." A little? My entire existence had been packed into boxes and pushed aside without so much as a phone call. But I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stood there, staring at a woman who used to make pancakes in the shape of my initials, and now didn't even think to tell me she gave away my bed. That was the moment something inside me shifted. They didn't just rearrange the house. They rearranged the family, and I had officially been edited out. If they thought I was going to slip quietly into the background, they were about to remember exactly who I was. My name is Lena Hartley, and I used to think I had the kind of childhood people envy. 2 parents who showed up to every piano recital, science fair, and parent-teacher conference. Saturday morning pancakes. Family movie nights where we all quoted lines from The Princess Bride like it was scripture. We weren't rich, but we were consistent. We were warm. I felt seen. I was an only child for 17 years, and I never questioned if that would change. My parents weren't the "we want a big family" type. They used to say I was more than enough. So when they started talking about maybe fostering or opening our hearts to someone who needs it, I figured it was just one of Mom's passing volunteer-fueled whims. She did that a lot, got inspired by some church panel or weekend retreat, came home bursting with idealism, then moved on. I never imagined they'd follow through, but then they met Grace. I didn't know the details at the time, just that she was 11, quiet, had been through a lot, and needed a permanent home. My parents filled out the paperwork without ever really asking what I thought. They told me it was happening and that I should be proud. That being part of a new chapter for someone was a gift. They talked about Grace like she was an opportunity for them, a fresh start, a chance to do good. She moved in the summer before my senior year. At first, I tried. I really did. I gave her space. I offered to help with homework. I even let her play on my old keyboard in the basement. But every effort I made felt like I was standing outside a glass wall, watching my parents pull her closer, while pushing me farther away. Suddenly, the house revolved around Grace. Dinner table conversations shifted to how Grace is adjusting. Family outings were tailored to her preferences. My childhood photos on the hallway wall were slowly replaced with new pictures. Grace at the zoo, Grace's art fair, Grace's first day of school, and I was still there, technically, still sleeping in the same room, still coming home on time, still acing my classes, but it didn't matter. I wasn't the story anymore. I was the background. I started noticing little things, like how my mom's tone changed, less nurturing, more dismissive, how my dad stopped making our weekly bookstore runs, how Grace got a new phone for her 12th birthday, and I was told mine didn't need replacing since you're off to college soon anyway. It wasn't just favoritism, it was replacement. Once I left for college, the distance became more than physical. They rarely called unless I reached out first. Holiday plans were vague and last minute. When I tried to schedule a visit home, there was always a reason it wasn't a good time. Grace had midterms, Grace was sick, Grace was just starting to settle. I began to wonder if I had imagined the love we used to share. Or maybe it had an expiration date. That's what hurt the most. Not just being left out, but realizing they didn't even notice they'd done it. I wasn't angry at Grace. Not then. It wasn't her fault. She didn't ask to be adopted into someone else's fading spotlight. But I couldn't ignore what was happening. They were building a new family, one framed in curated photos and social media posts, one that didn't include the girl who had once filled their world. And now I had proof. The room I thought would always be mine no longer existed. And with it, something inside me had officially snapped. They didn't just forget me. They erased me. And I was done pretending I didn't feel it. After the shock of seeing my room transformed into Grace's personal sanctuary, I spent the rest of spring break in a quiet kind of fury. I didn't argue. I didn't make scenes. That's not how I was raised. But I watched, and I remembered. On the second night home, we had dinner together, sort of. Grace sat in my old seat next to Dad. Mom had rearranged the kitchen table, of course, so the whole thing felt unfamiliar, off-kilter. They talked about Grace's dance recital, her upcoming art showcase, her favorite book series. No one asked me how school was going. No one mentioned the research assistant position I'd worked so hard to earn. I waited for someone to look at me, to ask something, anything. Nothing came. When I cleared my throat and said, I got nominated for the Huxley Academic Fellowship, my mom blinked like she didn't understand the words. Oh, she said vaguely. That's nice. Grace, tell Dad what your guidance counselor said about your reading level. I stared at my plate, heat rising in my chest. By the third day, it was clear. I wasn't just a visitor. I was a stranger. Grace wasn't hostile, but she didn't try to connect either. She treated me like a distant cousin stopping by for a night. She smiled politely, stayed out of my way, and never once called me by name. When I tried to talk to her, she'd nod and glance at my mom like she needed permission to respond. I started noticing how carefully she navigated the house, how quick she was to draw affection, how easy it was for her to play the part my parents desperately needed her to play. And I realized she didn't replace me accidentally. She replaced me perfectly. Every piece of her life had been woven into the fabric of the family I used to belong to. On the final day of break, I walked into the garage to grab an old photo album. I thought maybe I'd flip through it, remind myself that once I had belonged here too. But the shelves were reorganized. My boxes, labeled Lena's room, Lena High School, Lena Misk, were stacked carelessly in the corner, some of them open, some crushed. A few of my journals were shoved into a torn paper bag. One had water damage. As I picked them up, I saw something that made my throat close, the frame that used to sit on my bedside table. The one with a photo of me at age 7, sitting on Dad's shoulders at the beach. The glass was cracked. That was the moment the sadness hardened into something sharper. I wasn't going to be mournful anymore. I was going to be deliberate. I packed up my things in silence, drove back to campus without saying goodbye, and promised myself I wouldn't go back until I had something more than just words. They thought they were rewriting the story of our family, but I hadn't turned the last page. Not yet. I started planning that night, because if they were so comfortable forgetting me, I was going to make sure they remembered me in the one way they couldn't ignore. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted the truth to hurt as much as being forgotten had hurt me. After I returned to campus, I threw myself into school, but my mind kept drifting back to that cracked photo frame in the garage, to Grace sitting at my old seat, to my mom's face when I said, "Where's my room?" And she looked at me like I'd asked something absurd. They didn't see what they'd done. That was the problem. In their minds, they were saviors, heroes. They thought this story they were writing about healing, about second chances, was noble. They just forgot to leave room for their own daughter. So I stopped trying to be the one who was above it, and I started collecting receipts. It began with my old journals, the ones my parents had boxed up and forgotten about. I spent nights transcribing entries, photos, quotes, birthday memories, notes Dad used to write me in my lunchbox. Then I pulled emails, photos from childhood, videos I'd taken of family trips. I started compiling them into a digital timeline, my version of the family history. And then I remembered something important, my mom's annual holiday letters. Every year since I was 10, she'd sent long-winded updates to our extended family and friends, bragging about milestones, funny anecdotes, photos of me with gold medals and science trophies. I had copies of all of them, the last one that mentioned me in detail, the year before Grace arrived. After that, it became Our Growin' Family, New Beginnings, Grace's Incredible Journey. I decided to make a new version of that letter. I called it The Year I Was Rewritten. It was calm, honest, documented with dates, images, side-by-side comparisons of then and now. I didn't dramatize anything. I didn't even mention Grace's name. I just wrote what happened, how I used to be the daughter they celebrated, and how I slowly disappeared without a word. Then I did something bold. I printed 20 copies. I mailed them to my grandparents, aunts, uncles, family friends, and even my old piano teacher. All the people who used to get Mom's cheerful updates. I knew Mom would find out eventually, but I didn't stop there. I applied for a community fellowship that funded short film projects for underrepresented voices. My proposal? A short documentary titled Ghost Daughter, a visual story about familial erasure, the quiet kind, the kind no one talks about. It wasn't subtle, but it wasn't cruel either. It was truth in sharp focus, and it got accepted. I assembled a team of film students, dug through home footage, and narrated the pieces they never saw. The silence after the spotlight moved, the difference between being loved and being used to feel good. I blurred faces, I changed names, but anyone who really knew us would know. When the trailer went live online, it got shared more than I expected, quietly, carefully. People reached out, some from high school, some distant relatives. A few of them said, "I always wondered what happened." One even said, "I thought it was weird how your parents stopped mentioning you." I didn't say much back, because my goal wasn't to blow everything up. It was to hold up a mirror and let them see what they chose to become. The fallout started with a phone call. It came 3 days after the Ghost Daughter trailer went viral within our small circle of extended family and acquaintances. The call lit up my phone screen with a name I hadn't seen in months. Mom. I stared at it for a long time before letting it go to voicemail. A minute later, she sent a text. "Lena, we need to talk, please." I didn't answer. Instead, I watched the views tick upward and the shares multiply. A former teacher emailed me to say she'd cried. A family friend messaged me, "I never knew. You told that so gently, and it still broke me." I had spoken my truth, and now my parents had to sit with it. The next day, Dad called. Unlike Mom, he left a message. Lena, I saw the video. I'm sorry. I didn't know you felt like that. I didn't realize it had gotten that bad. Didn't realize? He had watched it happen in real time. He'd helped pack my boxes. He'd watched Grace take over my space. But now, facing the public echo of it, he suddenly found words? I wasn't interested in apologies born of embarrassment, but I wasn't trying to be cruel either. So I emailed back, just one sentence. I told you, and you didn't hear me. Now other people have. 2 days later, I received a formal message from the documentary festival committee. Ghost Daughter had been selected as a featured piece for the spring showcase. A public Q&A would follow the screening. I debated telling them I'd skip it, but then I thought, no, I'm not hiding anymore. Let them come. The night of the event, I stood backstage, heartbeat heavy in my throat. 100 folding chairs filled the university theater. Professors, students, strangers, even some people from town had shown up. And then I saw them, my parents, sitting side by side in the third row. They looked like ghosts of the people I used to know. Mom's hands were clasped tight in her lap. Dad was stiff, jaw clenched. Neither of them looked at me. The lights dimmed, the screen lit up. For 16 minutes, the audience watched the story unfold. My voice narrated over old family clips, blurred faces, shots of the empty room, the unopened birthday card I'd mailed, but never got a reply to. It wasn't an attack. It was a eulogy for a version of me that had been forgotten. When the lights came back on, there was silence, then applause. The moderator turned to me. Do you have anything to say before we open for questions? I looked straight ahead, then toward where my parents sat. And I said calmly, this wasn't made to shame anyone. It was made to remind them that forgetting someone doesn't mean they disappear. It just means you won't see what they become without you. And then I walked off the stage. I didn't need them to stand up. I didn't need them to apologize. They had already said enough by letting it happen. Now the world had seen it too. I didn't stay for the rest of the Q&A. I left the theater as soon as I stepped off the stage and walked into the night, the cool spring air sharp against my face. For the first time in a long time, I felt still. Not angry, not bitter, just still. I checked my phone once I reached my apartment. 3 missed calls, 1 from my dad, 2 from my mom, no voicemails, no texts. They had heard me, but now they didn't know what to say. Good. I didn't want apologies wrapped in guilt. I didn't want hugs or tears or we didn't know. I wanted them to sit in the quiet they left me in, to feel the space I used to fill, the one they'd given away. The next day, a letter arrived at my campus mailbox, handwritten, from my father. Lena, we watched the whole thing. I can't pretend it wasn't painful. It was. But not because you hurt us. Because you were right. We let go of you without even realizing we did. I thought you were so strong, so capable. I didn't see how invisible we were making you feel. That's on me. I'm sorry we took your silence for peace. Dad. No excuses, no bargaining, just acknowledgement. It was the first honest thing he'd given me in years. I didn't write back. I wasn't ready. But I folded the letter and tucked it inside the first journal I'd ever written in, back when I was 10 and still believed my parents would always protect me. Weeks passed, then months. Ghost Daughter was invited to 2 more festivals, one in Boston, one in Portland. I traveled, spoke on panels, met other creators who told stories about quiet abandonment, girls like me who had been the good daughter until they weren't needed anymore. I wasn't alone. I started mentoring younger students through the fellowship program, not just in filmmaking, but in reclaiming their voice, their stories, their space. And slowly I began building a life that didn't revolve around needing their approval. Grace sent me a message once. Just a few lines. I saw your film. I didn't understand before. I'm sorry, I know I got things I didn't earn. I didn't mean to take your place. It wasn't her fault. I never blamed her. I didn't respond, but I didn't delete it either. I kept moving forward. That summer, I moved into my own apartment. I filled it with things that were mine, entirely mine. Bookshelves, art prints, sunlight through wide windows. There was no old furniture, no borrowed history, just clean space, ready for new stories. One day while unpacking, I found that old photo from the beach, me on Dad's shoulders. The glass had been replaced, the frame was intact. I set it on my windowsill, not as a symbol of what I'd lost, but of what I'd survived. And every time I looked at it, I reminded myself, I didn't burn bridges. I simply stopped waiting for someone else to walk across. It's strange how the deepest grief isn't always loud. It's quiet. It's in the silences between text messages that never come, in birthdays that pass with nothing but a Facebook notification, in holidays where you're no longer expected, but also not missed. It's in walking into your childhood home and realizing no one saved a place for you, but that kind of grief also teaches you something. Left the theater as soon as I stepped off the stage and walked into the night, the cool spring air sharp against my face. For the first time in a long time, I felt still. Not angry, not bitter, just still. I checked my phone once I reached my apartment. 3 missed calls, 1 from my dad, 2 from my mom. No voicemails, no texts. They had heard me, but now they didn't know what to say. Good. I didn't want apologies wrapped in guilt. I didn't want hugs or tears or we didn't know. I wanted them to sit in the quiet they left me in, to feel the space I used to fill, the one they'd given away. The next day, a letter arrived at my campus mailbox. Handwritten, from my father. Lena. We watched the whole thing. I can't pretend it wasn't painful. It was. But not because you hurt us. Because you were right. We let go of you without even realizing we did. I thought you were so strong, so capable. I didn't see how invisible we were making you feel. That's on me. I'm sorry we took your silence for peace. Dad. No excuses, no bargaining, just acknowledgement. It was the first honest thing he'd given me in years. I didn't write back. I wasn't ready. But I folded the letter and tucked it inside the first journal I'd ever written in, back when I was 10 and still believed my parents would always protect me. Weeks passed, then months. Ghost Daughter was invited to 2 more festivals, one in Boston, one in Portland. I traveled, spoke on panels, met other creators who told stories about quiet abandonment. Girls like me who had been the good daughter until they weren't needed anymore. It teaches you how to hold yourself when no one else does. It's been over a year since I made Ghost Daughter. Since I opened that wound and let people look at the part of me I used to hide. The part that whispered, what if I was never enough? But now I know better. I wasn't erased because I failed them. I was erased because they couldn't imagine that love has to stretch, not shift. They adopted Grace. They gave her what she needed. That's not wrong. What's wrong is that they didn't think they could love 2 daughters at once. They chose simplicity over complexity. I used to think that meant I wasn't wanted. That maybe if I'd smiled more or needed them less, they would have held on. But love isn't a prize you win by behaving, and abandonment isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of someone else's limits. Now, I don't need to prove anything, not to my parents, not to Grace, not even to myself. I've built a different kind of home. It's not made of walls or bedrooms or who sits at the dinner table. It's made of people who see me, really see me, who don't just clap when I succeed, but ask how I'm doing when I don't. People who hold space for my voice, even when it's shaking. I have mentors, friends, students I guide through their first films, a roommate who bakes when she's nervous and always leaves the light on for me when I'm out late editing. And most of all, I have myself, not the version of me that tried so hard to stay small and sweet, but the real me, the one who says no without guilt, who doesn't shrink when others feel uncomfortable, who knows how to be forgotten, and still writes herself back into the story. Last month, I got a letter from my grandmother. She wrote, "I watched your film twice. I cried both times. I'm sorry no one protected you, but I want you to know I never forgot you, not for a second." I cried too, not because I needed her to say it, but because it reminded me I wasn't invisible to everyone. Some people noticed. Some people cared, even if they didn't know how to speak up at the time. Sometimes healing isn't about fixing the past. It's about recognizing who you are now. I'm no longer the girl waiting for someone to open the door and invite her back in. I've built my own house, hung my own photos, chosen my own nameplate on the door. It reads, Lena Hartley, storyteller, daughter, unforgettable, and no one can take that away from me again.